and I believe they should come up in the StreamYard chat. And it looks like we have one viewer. There we go. All right, the world's on fire. So let's begin. Hi, my name is Brian. This is the channel is Headway, and we're hoping to use our heads and make some headway in this world with some open conversation and sincere dialogue about complicated issues. Talking to me today is Dr. Oren Amitay, a psychologist from Toronto. And maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, and we can get going on just let it go.
Sure. So I am a registered clinical psychologist. So I have a private practice. I do assessments, I see patients, and I teach at the university. And I've been teaching human sexuality for almost 20 years. I've taught 20 different courses at 5 different universities, almost 200 times. And so something I love to do. And in teaching about trans issues, I've taught it probably over almost 100 times right now, and over the past almost 20 years. And it's changed dramatically over these years because with the changes in politics, with the changes in society, with things that have been going on, it's required me to kind of educate my students in ways that I normally didn't have to do. I have to, part of it is teaching, and part of it is trying to deprogram and let them see, you know, all of these issues that you and I are going to touch upon, or at least some of them we're going to touch upon, in a broader light, putting aside the ideology, putting aside the feelings, although still having compassion and being able to see reality for what it is rather than what's being shoved down their throats. So that's been a huge shift in my teaching over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's the same topic, same phenomena, same materials, except updated, but the approach has been very different just because of it's necessitated by how things have gone. And the biggest problem is cancel culture. So having a discussion like this, automatically, you're going to be labeled a transphobe, I'm going to be labeled a transphobe, and anything we say, certain people are not going to be able to hear what we're actually saying. They're only going to hear what they want to hear. So I'm hoping that people will be open-minded, as you say, and use our heads to be able to have rational, productive discussions about important issues.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So is human sexuality your primary focus in your practice, or are you more of a general psychologist? If that's
yeah, it's because of my teaching. It's something that people feel comfortable being able to come and speak with me about, whether it's human sexuality, relationships. That's a big part of my practice. I do a lot of couples work, but I also work with families. I work with individuals. I deal with depression, anxiety, work-related issues, schizophrenia, substance abuse, eating disorders, take your pick. But I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in some of those areas. Whereas with human sexuality, it's something that I'm very well versed in. And a little bit of personal background, which most people who know me know. It also helps that I was raised by a woman who opened up Canada's first sex store, or one of Canada's first sex stores, Ontario's first sex store for sure. Lovecraft, 1972. So, it's organic for me. It's just second nature, basically.
Right. That's kind of interesting. Maybe can you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm sure that's something that people haven't explored too much.
Okay, well, yeah, in 1972, January, my mother and her business partner, Mary, who was a few years my mom's senior, my mom was in her early 20s, they left Montreal, came to Toronto to open up the sex store. They had seen shops in Europe, that were doing this. They weren't just these dingy little head shops that, that's where you used to be able to buy vibrators or other sex toys, was in these disgusting little places, and people were ashamed. So they opened up a boutique up in Yorkville in Toronto. The Tony, back then it was known for its hippie chic, and then it became the trendy. Now, it's one of the more expensive streets in Toronto. And so it was the first store of its kind in Ontario. And, as somebody wrote many years ago, it actually became a victim of its own success because it broke laws, people who didn't like sexuality, people who didn't like two women, enabling others to be able to explore their sexuality in a healthy, mature, productive way. They tried to shut them down. So laws were established around the store because my mom and Mary, they went to court, they fought to be able to sell the products that they sell. And the reality is they both opened it up with the hope of, let's say, giving people with physical disabilities the ability to enjoy pleasure. That was their their primary drive. They wanted to make it accessible. They wanted to be a store that was accessible to all people. and and being women positive. And I would say it's one of the first truly positive spaces. And it was the first time, I would say, at least in Canada, maybe in North America, if not the world, where the primary clients of a sex-based business, whether we're talking like about anything about any sex industry, movies, sex, prostitution, whatever else like that, that the clients, the customers, were predominantly women. That set the stage, and it was a safe space for women, for gay people, for trans people, for sex workers, everybody. So I was raised in that environment, very open-minded, very compassionate, and very non-discriminatory. Everybody is who they are. They're just all people. So that really had a huge impact on me in my thinking and also in my professional practice, because when people speak with me, nothing they say is going to shock me. Nothing. They're never going to get a look of of judgment or anything like that. It's just like, look, if you're not doing well, if you're struggling, if something's holding you back, let's just look at it realistically and see how can we change it in a way that's going to work for you and help you move forward in life.
Right. And I guess as a psychologist, you're probably a little better than the average person at maybe discerning something that is a healthy feeling or urge versus something that might not be working for the person in the long run. So I'm guessing that you help counsel people to make that distinction for themselves as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's actually very important, because I say to them, I'm not going to tell you the right thing. I'm just going to reflect what you're saying, let you see it, give you my perspective, talk about reality, statistics, whatever else might be relevant, and then help you decide what is the best choice to make for yourself. And being realistic. And what I say is, I say I don't sell happiness. Okay. I say I sell meaning, purpose, values. Okay. And I say if you're able to embrace those concepts and use them to move forward in life, I say I guarantee you happiness will come. That's a byproduct of what we do.
Right. And I think ultimately, if a person goes against the truth, that the friction is going to be all on them, right? So, and there's some truths that are external and some are internal, and maybe aligning those two can be a challenge. I think it is for me in my daily life, and we live in a complicated world where ideas of truth themselves are being questioned. That you mentioned kind of this new trend in the ways of thinking, and you talk about deprogramming. I think it's interesting that we started with the story about your mother opening a store in the 1970s, because I think part of what the conversation is talking about here is a change in the approach to human rights issues in a broader sense. I mean, in particular, we're going to be talking about sexuality, but I think the biggest friction that we're having today is there's been an evolution of attitudes about sex and sexuality to be more inclusive and welcoming and safe for everybody. But I think there's also an ideological shift that is taking us away from a more liberal, positivist point of view and more into something that, is very commonly being criticized as postmodern. And, there are these rhetorical shifts in the way we're approaching these issues that I think is actually harming the conversation. I think it actually harms the groups that maybe would benefit the most from these conversations. I mean, I was born in the 60s, the last 6 months of the 1960s, and I've certainly seen a lot of cultural shift in attitudes about different kinds of, discrimination in the world. And, I've seen, and it's been all positive, right? And we were not in a great place when I was growing up. They were like candies had certain names and things like that. So, I was raised in a very progressive mindset. I considered myself a liberal, as a child, to the extent that I understood what that meant. And I always felt like we were really making progress. I never thought we were all the way there, but I thought we had a good strategy, a good approach. And so, and it's understandable that this new generation of people want to carry the torch further. And I think that maybe they feel that it's time to discard the old tools and pick up some new tools. But I think the tools are maybe part of the problem. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, it's ironic that the people who historically would be the most open-minded and actually truly progressive, they call themselves progressive. Maybe they call themselves open-minded, but they're very closed-minded because they're saying, yes, I want and I'm going to stereotype here, but many of the people who are leading the charge, the woke, so to speak, they're saying they're doing this for everyone's well-being. They're saying they're doing it for inclusivity, but it's not inclusivity if it goes against what they believe, right? It's inclusivity if you're on board with me. And somebody said this a while ago. I forget who it was. I saw on a podcast where he's saying they want everybody to be tolerant. Well, if you agree with somebody else, that's not tolerance. That's just agreeance. A tolerance is when you're with somebody who sees things differently than you, who acts differently, who has different background, and you go, you know what? As long as it's not harming me, I'm okay with that. I'm prepared. I'm willing to listen to your ideas, your approach to dealing with things, your lifestyle, whatever it is. And again, as long as it's not having a direct negative or harmful impact on me, why should I even care, right? And so the irony is that they're using, it's irony, but it's also subterfuge. They're using language in one way, pretending that it's something, when in reality, what they're doing is almost the opposite of that. I mean, the best example, I'm just going to go on a little tangent here, is Antifa. Okay? The greatest example, Antifa, anti-fascist. If they say, well, it's in our name, Antifa, anti-fascist, we are anti-fascist while committing acts that are as fascist as you can be, okay? Compassionate people being totally incompassionate, people calling for tolerance when they're totally intolerant themselves, right? We see this all the time. And the problem is that because they are promoting ideas that any right-minded, good-hearted person would want to embrace and would want to promote, right? Inclusivity, tolerance, compassion, let people live the way they want. Because they are promoting that idea, people are jumping on board, or social justice, whatever it is, because that's what a good person would do. The problem is the mechanics are broken. The way they're going about it, any critical thinker could step back, detach themselves from the idea, just step back and truly analyze how it's being done. And it's very clear to see that the math does not add up. 2 + 2 does not equal 5, but that's what these people want us to believe. And I'm not using that. I mean, that's a bit of a
it's Orwellian trope. Yeah, no, but you're right. You're right.
Right. But I was going to say that that's also recently that people have been trying to convince us. They're saying, no, here we can show you how 2 + 2 can equal 5 if you do this, this, and that, and stand from this perspective on the moon and look down. So again, I understand the intent, but the application is being done so poorly, and so many people are not willing or able to truly look at their words and their actions and the outcome. And that's where the problem comes.
Right. So, it's interesting you mentioned that, because there's a push to redefine terms. For example, the 2 + 2 = 5 thing. And right. I've noticed, I've read, Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay's Cynical Theories. And, I'm aware a little bit, at least, from a top level view from what they've explained about some of the, the first principles, if I dare to call them that are being employed. And it seems to me like a lot of these are more strategies than a pursuit of the truth. And, they use these different things where they fuzz boundaries. One of the tactics is specifically to go against normativity.
Right.
And it seems to me that, there are a lot of arguments that are actually self-defeating arguments, and they actually contradict within its own scope of its own argumentation. So, for example, since we're going on to some tangents here, but, when we talk about critical race theory, there's this principle in there that said, that basically reifies racial essentialism. Right. And so science kind of says, well, no, actually, there is really no race. There are ancestry groups that might, inherit some attributes, but it's just the human race. So racial essentialism is actually a myth, but they reify it for political purposes. And then at the same time, when we talk about, and now we get into the topic of gender or sex, biological essentialism is an insult. It's a pejorative term. You're a biological essentialist. I was called one recently by somebody. And so how can those two terms really coincide? Because you're saying, like, what do they have in common is what I'm asking. So if science shows that race is not essential, but they're saying that it is, and if science shows that biological sex is a real thing, but they're saying it isn't because now it's a social construct. It seems to me that the pattern is to just go against whatever's established as normal. And then, of course, they bring in the notion of power and normativity, and you get into all these like postmodern terms. So it seems like part of the plan is to just flip things over rather than to find a new way for us to live together and to live in harmony. I think it's just more about inverting power. And then what happens when they're in power? Then you have to have a rebellion, like what's the end game? And I don't know that they really have one. I think I think there's a certain sense, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's this like video on YouTube, there's these, or it's on social media anyway, and there's a dog on either side of a fence, and they're like growling and barking at each other, and they're just like really angry. And then someone pulls the fence back, and then the dogs. I don't think that people understand that the fence is actually quite thin, and that when you break through, you have to have a plan for how you're going to actually deal with the person on the other side. So, so we've gone on a couple of tangents. We've kind of introduced a little bit about you and your story. Tell me, since this is a topic about transgenderism, maybe we'll just start from the basics. Tell me, you as a psychologist, and you teach this stuff all the time, what is transgender, and what maybe a little bit about the history of what the definition of transgender is, and maybe how, if it's mutated in any way in recent years, maybe you can describe that.
Okay, so the thing is, when I'm going to talk more about the modern, let's say, iterations, because when people ask me about history and things like that, I say, you know what, it's important to know it, but ask me people's names, ask me to cite things and everything. I say, not going to happen. That's not my brain.
Sure.
Got too much other information. So I'll take it in my approach. Okay. And
absolutely. Yeah. I'm not asking for, names and dates. I'm just saying maybe just
right.
the change in the thinking.
The change is the most important, because and just by coincidence, I said this to you off air, that I was teaching this in my class today. I've taught it the last few weeks. So by synchronicity, I was talking about the transgender issue. And something I say in class is the term trans or transgender essentially has no meaning right now. Okay. It's the same as queer. Ask I've spoken to so many older gay men who go, we don't even know what queer means anymore. Back in the day, we had an idea, but the boundaries, the definitions are getting so fuzzy these days that it seems to be, and I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just a byproduct of how things have happened, but it seems that people want a more vague, terminology rather than defined. Because in the old days, I'm talking about maybe up until 20 years ago or less, we would say, for example, somebody was a transvestite or they were transsexual. Okay, transgender wasn't the term. It was transvestite or transsexual. Now, there's a whole bunch of other issues we can talk about, but those are the two main categories. And people, even then, people didn't know what they were. So we had to explain. A transvestite is somebody, and in the DSM, it's transvestic fetishism. So if it's a disorder in the sense that it's causing distress or it's interfering with your life, whereas open-minded people say, if you're a transvestite and it doesn't bother you and it doesn't impair your functioning in any way, all the power to you. That's my stance. Same with being transsexual. If you were able to live your life as the other sex and you're happy with it, bless you. All the power to you. Okay, as an adult, right? So the transvestite was, and traditionally it was always male to female, the vast majority, at least the research. There were women to males, but for the vast majority of the research of the clinical cases, it was male to female. And so a transvestite was a man who enjoyed dressing in women's clothing, often in most cases were straight, they weren't gay. And, there's also drag queens, which is a different element. But they enjoyed. They got some, let's say, sexual arousal or pleasure out of wearing, for example, lingerie. And so a powerful businessman could be going to work in his $10,000 suit with lingerie underneath it. Nobody knew, but it gave him pleasure to do that. And other men, they would go further, and they would actually then start dressing up as a woman when they felt more free, liberated, or able to do so. Or they might go to special clubs where they were able to do that, not be seen by the rest of the world. Whereas a transsexual was somebody who would want to actually become the other sex, and they would either undergo hormonal and or surgical treatment to be able to have the body parts to go along with that, being a transsexual person, or to be the opposite sex. So that was originally how we defined it, quite simply. Then there came the term trans. Okay, the umbrella term trans or transgender, which includes both of those. And now today, even in the last few months, there were some polls where more people are identifying as transgender, and it's in the younger generation, in the Gen Zs, more than ever before. But it's not that they actually have this urge to be the opposite sex. They just don't like the labels ascribed to maleness or femaleness. So they could be gender queer. It can be gender non-binary. They can say, I don't subscribe to this belief that a male has to act this way or that way. Okay.
So it's sort of a gray area in between.
Or it's like, I just call it an umbrella term. It's like everything anything underneath, anything that's not your tradition. That's what it's become now. Anyone who doesn't fit into a stereotypical idea of what male or female is supposed to be, they're putting this under transgender. And I've spoken to some of my trans patients, and they say, and I say to them, that this is, blurring the lines, or it's not so clear. And they go, yeah, I get it. They go, but it's a term, we can use it. And they like that flexibility because and I can't speak for everybody, of course, but one of the ideas is that they're not restricted to a term, right? Being trans, you can be whoever you want, right? So I don't see anything wrong in theory with somebody feeling that I just want to be how I am. It's the only problem is in pursuit of that, they are not saying, hey, just leave me alone and let me be who I am. They're saying you had better give me A, B, and C. I see the world this way, and I demand that you see the world the way that I see it, and that you let me live the way I want to live, regardless of the impact it has on you or anybody else. Now, that's not everybody, because most of my trans patients and the trans people I know say, I just want to live in peace. I'm not political. I just want to be able to, to live in a way that's true to myself, and I don't expect everybody to, to buy into what I'm doing. I just want to be treated with dignity and respect and not have to worry about getting beaten up or losing a job or something like that, right? And again, I'm telling you right now, so many of the quote unquote trans people today simply are what we call gender non-conforming. That, it could be a tomboy. And I've had so many lesbian women or straight women who happen to be tomboys. So many of them say, whether my patients or colleagues or friends, people on Facebook, whatever, saying, if I grew up 10 or 20 years later, they would have called me trans. And you know what? If you call me a tomboy, if I'm a woman and you call me a tomboy or you call me trans, if it's just a label, that's just a label. However, if going along with the term trans, there are several other factors that are actually harmful. Namely, if I am told, if I am trans, then I should do certain things like bind my breast. I should get hormonal treatment. I should suppress my testosterone or estrogen, depending which sex I am. And eventually I should take cross-sex hormones, which can leave me infertile, which can cause other problems. Even suppressing your hormones, we know now, well, we've known this for years, but only in the last few months did institutions like in the UK, the National Health Services and Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic, they had to change their website. And I'm just throwing this out there kind of randomly, but they had on their website until I think it was October or November of 2020, they said puberty blockers are harmless. They are reversible. They can save your life, basically, because you would rather have a trans girl than a dead boy, this kind of stuff. Now, they didn't actually say that literally, but they say that's a narrative that's being promulgated. So they took that off the site because every endocrinologist or other medical doctor or researcher, anyone worth his or her salt, knows that puberty blockers, when used on people with healthy organs, people who are not going through precocious puberty, people who do not have some type of organ issue or hypothalamus issue that's changing their internal functioning, if they're functioning healthy and you suppress their natural production of hormones, it's going to have an effect on your brain, on your bones, bone density, and so on. They knew that, but these organizations would not allow responsible, caring clinicians or advocates to say, let's slow down a little bit. Let's not rush to a direction that can be harmful. So again, if a little girl was a tomboy and it was just a name tomboy versus trans and that was it, I would have no problem. But now the word trans has so much else affiliated with it, which can cause harm. And this harm can be permanent and irreversible. And that's why I've been taking such a stance. I've suffered professionally. I've suffered personally. And I don't, it's not a poor me thing. I make this choice. I know what I'm doing, but and I get nothing, I have nothing to gain from this. I've never monetized anything I've done. Not one of my videos or anything else like that. Even when I was riding high, in the media or on social media, people said to me, start a Patreon, do this. I said, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's something I truly believe in. And if you speak to enough people, whether it's the children, the adolescents, the adults, or the families of them, and you see how much harm is being done because of misinformation and ideology, I can't stay silent. My parents didn't raise me that way.
Right. And you know what? Yeah. So
I just threw a lot at you. Sorry.
Yeah. No. That's great. No, that's what we're here. We're here to hear you. Tell the story. Right. I think it's interesting because just a few. I'll just maybe pick a few things out of that. One of the things you talked about was maybe a change in terminology, where there used to be transvestitism, and then transsexualism, and now transgender is this kind of, maybe we call it a fuzzy area in between, where a transgender person can possibly be transsexual or not. Am I reading that right? Right. So they could have had like some kind of transition surgery or procedure done or not, but it's sort of a more blanket category,
right?
Which I think. And I think in the modern zeitgeist, if that's how we want to redefine terms, I guess it's okay in a certain sense, but it can be confusing for people who want to be genuine, sympathetic, helpful allies and say, look, I support you in what you want to do, but if I call you he or she or the wrong thing by accident, or maybe somebody doesn't want to use the terms that the other person feels because it just doesn't match their own reality of the perception. They're maybe not intending any harm. But if somebody is a trans gay person, their identity is, for example, similar to that of a straight person of their original natal sex, or at least their preference would be, right?
Right. See now. And people have asked me that. They say, okay, if someone transitions and so if a man transitions into a woman and he likes women, now she likes women, does that make this person lesbian? Or it's very confusing. So just to make it easier for us, we use the term androphilic and gynophilic. That way it doesn't matter what your biological sex is or what your gender identity is. It's just, who are you attracted to? So androphilic would be attracted to men,
right?
Gynophilic attracted to women. So that's okay.
That's interesting. So I posted, if anybody had any questions to ask you. I haven't had a chance to look if there are any more, but there was one from someone named Deborah, and she was asking, what is the difference between a trans person and someone with AGP, autogynephilia?
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to tell everybody, I'm going to try to do it really quickly because it's so complex. But there are when we talk about these terms and the danger that can happen, the biggest danger is when certain terms or realities are conflated. So let me talk about the three conflations, and that's one of them. Okay. So let me give the three terms. So one conflation is when we conflate being transgender with being intersex, which we don't call intersex anymore. We call it differences of sex development. So, and in the old days it was called hermaphroditism, but it's not like they have two sets of external genitalia, just their external genitalia and their internal sex organs may not necessarily match, or their genitalia may be ambiguous. It's not so clear. And that's somebody who truly is assigned male or female at birth. And I'm telling you right now, Brian, I will refuse. I will never, when I see people use the term assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, I take umbrage with that, because you're not assigned. It's observed. You're observed even before birth in utero, or with the chromosomes and everything. We know this. So trans people, their response to that is, they say, well, what about XXY or XX, or someone has XY, but they have these genital. Yeah, those are called differences of sex development. And that has nothing to do with transgenderism. That's totally separate. And I know a number of people with DSD who are opposed to being lumped in or using their situation to promote the trans cause, right? So that's one conflation, two totally separate conditions, right? Number one. Number two, second conflation is conversion therapy for sexual orientation, which is evil. It's been shown not to work. It's shame-based. You try to beat the gay out of somebody. And I've had a number of patients who are victims or survivors of that. And it's just pure evil. If it worked, that would be something else. But it doesn't work. Okay? And I meant if it worked.
I might take a little exception to if it works, if you beat somebody into it. But
no, I didn't. Okay. Let me reframe that. Okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was, okay, so if a gay adult came to me and said, look, you know what, I don't like to be gay, right, and I'd like to be able to change, and we did enough therapy where we could see that it wasn't because they were shamed out of it or for anything else like that. If they were able to change something about themselves, if it actually worked, and it could be done in a healthy way that they truly, and again, we're not talking like one session, let's do it. We're talking long-term therapy to see why do you feel this way and so on. And conversely, if someone were straight and wanted to become gay, and and we saw that there was a healthy motive, it wasn't, again, I keep going back to shame. It's not shame-based, not fear-based, but there's some other thing. If it could work that way, that's what I meant by if it worked. And if it was done compassionately, not the torture that it comprises.
Of course.
Thank you for clarifying that. So yes, I would be okay with that if they were adults. Okay. So it's conversion therapy for sexual orientation, which doesn't work, which is evil. And then now in Canadian law right now, they're debating this at this very moment, Bill C-6, where they include not just sexual orientation, but gender identity. So what they're saying about conversion therapy, if I had a trans kid and I forced this kid and I beat them and I tortured them to try to make them, into a gender typical child, that would be unhealthy. However, talking to a child or an adolescent or an adult to say, well, why do you feel that, this is who you are? Where did it come from? Especially if you're an adolescent and you've shown no signs at all about this ever in your life, and suddenly you're saying I'm trans and I want to go on hormone blockers or surgery, just to ask them, what else is going on in your life? Maybe this dysphoria that you're feeling, this discomfort or distress or whatever else you're feeling, maybe it can be alleviated through other means. Maybe there's trauma, right? Maybe there's loss. Maybe there's another mental health condition that might be leading to these feelings. So before we rush to judgment and radical interventions, maybe we could see if there's other ways to alleviate your distress. Okay. And that, up until a couple of years ago, every psychologist would say, well, that's exactly what we do with every condition. We want to explore. We don't want to force them anything. We want to just see what's going on with them and to help them alleviate whatever distress they may be feeling or whatever other issues they're dealing with, right? That was normal. But now that's going to be called potentially conversion therapy. And Dr. Ken Zucker and Dr. James Cantor both went on they had a panel, I think it was like 6 weeks ago, maybe I could be 2 months, maybe, where they said to the panel of senators, they said, the way the wording is now, psychologists don't know, or any person in the mental health profession doesn't know whether just asking those kinds of questions would be considered, conversion therapy, which you could lose your license. And now they're trying to make it that you could go to jail, okay, for asking these kinds of questions. So that's the second conflation. Okay. And then the third one, to the person's question, Dr. Ray Blanchard in 1980, I'm going to say 87, I could be off by a couple of years, but in the 80s, he's not the first person to discover these two different types, but he's the first person to make a clear taxonomy where he described two different types of trans people. Now, back in those days, virtually all the subjects were male to female, and these were all called transsexuals. They were male to female transsexuals. All right. And so there was the homosexual transsexual and the autogynephilic transsexual. And you might as well be talking about apples and oranges. They are two completely different phenomena, and they are getting conflated. So let me just describe them, and people are going to take issue. Some people will take issue. I've spoken with enough people, including the experts, including trans people themselves, and looked at all the literature. And to be clear, just because I always leave open the unknown, and I don't like hardcore, it has to be A or B. I think there can be a third type, I truly believe, who don't fall into either category. Okay. But when I talked to Dr. Blanchard and then Dr. Michael Bailey, who popularized these terms in his book, The Man Who Would Be Queen, I think it was 2004. I might be off by a year. And by the way, people, it's not a plug because I don't get any money from this. You can go to my website, docamitay.com, and on the front page, you can download for free The Man Who Would Be Queen. one of the most controversial books out there. And when you talk about cancel culture, Dr. Bailey, 15 years ago, or 16 or 17 years ago, to this day, is one of the most canceled people on the planet. People, or they tried to cancel him. He's still going strong. He's a professor at Indiana University. So, or Northwest, one of those Northeast University, I think. Anyway, so this is where these terms became popular. And so the homosexual transsexual, and once again, for anyone who's going to criticize me, there can be a third type. But the homosexual transsexual was a young man who, from a very young age, when we talk about trans kids, and here's where the conflation comes in. When the other type, autogynephile, which I'll describe in a second, when they're trying to make this claim about we were born in the wrong body, they point to the homosexual transsexuals, because the homosexual transsexual is a little boy from the age of 2, 3, 4 years old, right? You start seeing, it's more about 3 or 4 years old, but I'm there could be younger cases, but we're talking around 3, 4 years old and a bit older, where if you let the hair grow longer and put them on in a dress, you would think this is a little girl. They look
passing or presenting. Is that the characteristic?
Well, we say passing when you're adult and you're trying to. Okay, and as a little kid, I don't know if they're trying to pass, but they definitely feel like a girl in their limited understanding of what sex is, or what quote unquote gender is, but as sex. So yes, they as older adults or as teens, they could easily pass. Okay, so, and they don't have to have any surgery or even hormones. Wear long hair, put on some makeup, you go, that's a girl. Okay,
their native characteristics.
Exactly. So they're often more frail, and they're very effeminate. All right, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. I'm talking statistically speaking here. We know, and the research is pretty clear here, that if the little boy is effeminate, there's a greater, there's a probability that he's going to be gay. Not everyone, of course. Or a gay boy, there's a probability more so than a straight boy that he will be effeminate. Obviously not everybody. But if you let these homosexual transsexuals, these boys, if they didn't transition, they would simply grow up to be very effeminate gay men. Okay? But as they get older, the problem is that they like men because they're gay. That's not a problem unless you like straight men. If you're a man who likes straight men, it's pretty tricky because straight men don't want to be with men, right? Right. Does that make sense? That's where the problem is. And this is what Michael, and I'm really simplifying Michael Bailey's book. And again, it's based on Ray Blanchard's work. So basically a homosexual transsexual, very effeminate young child, never really fit in, would play with girls' toys, whatever. And some of them, unfortunately, they have parents who are very closed-minded or harsh, or the peers, they quote unquote beat the gay out of them. And so some learn, whoa, I can't be this way. I've got to be more masculine. Whereas others go, no, this is who I am, and I'm going to stay this way, damn it. Or some of them suppress it, and then when they get a bit older and they have more freedom, then they go, no, I'm going to be who I am. And so again, and I like straight men, so I can't get a straight man as a man. So transitioning into a woman affords me that ability, or gives me that ability to attract straight men because they think I'm a woman. And some of them keep their penises, others don't, because they want to attract the person. And if the person is open-minded, or maybe they're bisexual, or what they call pansexual, meaning they'll attract anybody, or will be willing to be with anybody, including trans people, then they have an opportunity to be with them. Whereas others have the surgery, and if it's good surgery, if it's done well, the non-discerning partner would think I'm with a woman. Okay, now there's two things. One is about the wanting to have a man, like a straight man, as their partner. And the other reason that some of them transition is they're just saying, I can't live life like a man or the way the society wants me to be. I'm more comfortable being very effeminate, and they can pass very easily. So some more so than others, but most of them can pass. And they go, yeah, so being a woman, it's easier in life for me. Right? Because that's more close to who I am. And I've had a number of trans patients like that who they just, again, they don't want to have to try to live up to these ideals of what is a man. So that's it. That's the homosexual transsexual. And you don't see many problems with them in social media or whatever else. Almost every homosexual transsexual I know says, just leave me be. Okay? I just want to live in peace. That's it. Okay. And they don't get stopped when they go to bathrooms or anything else like that. Especially if they've transitioned, you wouldn't know. they look like they belong in women's spaces. Right. And, and then women there are some, some women, or a number of women would say, I don't care if they look that way or if they look like a man wearing a dress. The fact is they are not women. They don't belong in our spaces. Right. So, you know what, it's a big debate, but I think that if this person looks like a woman, right, doesn't pose a threat, is not going to attack anybody like that, and they're in this space, I personally wouldn't have a problem, with certain people. In general, however, I can understand why people would have concerns about having biological males in female spaces. So I fully understand that.
It's really interesting, the bathroom debate, because that people are not ever going to completely agree. Somebody's going to say no way. Somebody's going to say it has to be. My thought was, why don't we just de-gender the bathrooms? We can just have a place called the bathroom. When you go to someone's house, you don't say, where's your men's room, right? You say, where's the bathroom? This is the place with the toilet paper and the flushy thing. Okay, I'll use that.
Right.
So I don't know, that would be my proposal. But it's so interesting because as you yourself acknowledge, there's a diversity of perspectives on how people identify themselves and how they feel. And, it may or may not be aligned with whatever their natal sex is. And that, that's just part of the reality of the world we live in. But they all have different opinions on it. So how can we live peacefully together if we can't even agree on terms? And on top of that, we have these new efforts to redefine terms. But I wanted to kind of get to the sort of part of the other topic was, we've been sort of talking on.
Sorry, Brian. Yeah. Sorry, Brian. The only problem is I didn't get to say about the autogynephile.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
No, you were getting there. You're right. You were doing the three.
Right. Exactly. So the homosexual transsexual, again, most people, they wouldn't even know that they were transgender. A lot of them, you really wouldn't know, especially if they had surgery. Okay. The autogynephile, and again, this has been around since the beginning of time, that we know that there were people who were not, they didn't have the surgery and the hormones at the time, but they were men who dressed like women, and in different cultures they would have the third gender or the third sex, however you want to call it, and people were okay with that. But they didn't think that they're different species or anything like that. They just, or different sex. They incorporated them into their culture. Okay, so the thing is, this autogynephile homosexual transsexual, again, this was around for many years, but Ray Blanchard is the one who categorized it and said, here's the difference. And this is very important. This is what people don't know. People have no idea about this. And I understand why autogynephiles do not like to be described this way. But I also know many autogynephiles who say, yes, this is who I am. I'm okay with it. I don't necessarily want to tell the world that this is, my proclivities, but this is who I am. And so the people who can accept it, I'll describe in a second, but the autogynephiles who can truly accept that they have this paraphilia or fetish. Paraphilia is a broader term. Fetish is a bit more specific. They're essentially the same in many ways, but paraphilia kind of is less of the sex, more about the love, so to speak. Okay, and that incorporates the sexual feelings. But anyone who can say, you know what, I have this paraphilia. I see them. They do have gender dysphoria. They do, and I'll explain it in a second, but they don't seem to start kind of losing almost their grip on reality. I don't see that with them. Whereas I've seen autogynephiles who don't accept it. Now, by the way, I should say they look like autogynephiles, but they deny it. Okay, even if they've actually shown that they have it, they still deny it. They seem to have a harder time dealing with reality. Okay, they seem to struggle more and so on. So here's what the autogynephile is. Okay, so it's somebody who, as a boy, they were boily boys. That sounds so stupid. They were your stereotypical boys. They were into sports and everything. When they started to go into puberty and into adolescence, they were your typical teenage jocks. Rough
and tumble play, all of that. Yeah.
Sorry.
Rough and tumble play, etc.
Rough and tumble play. No, they were your stereotypical males. But what was happening was, as they were growing into their sexuality, they started realizing, oh, I like women's lingerie. Okay, so the developmental path, and this is again Dr. Blanchard, Dr. Zucker, others who've Dr. Ann Lawrence, who work with them. They've identified this history as it's a trajectory. All right, some of them Some of them, maybe when they were younger, did wear a dress or something like that. Okay, maybe there was, but a lot of boys who have none of these issues, they wear dresses too. It's like, it's just dress up. Okay, but some of them, they go, aha, see, this is proof that I was a girl the entire time. And it's like, no, no, no. Okay, again, you're conflating with the homosexual transsexuals who really did act like a girl the entire childhood, or had to try to hide it, but still you see that they were really struggling to be like this girl that they believe they were. But the autogynephile, they didn't have those concerns. They are boys and men. But when they started to, again, go through puberty, they developed a let's say an interest in women's lingerie, maybe their sisters or their mom's lingerie, whatever, and bras, whatever. And then they would, get sexually aroused by it. Okay, so if this is where it stopped, then we would have transvestite, like they'd be transvestites, right, or transvestic fetishism, if that's where it stopped. But it doesn't stop; it gets stronger and stronger, to the point that that they're not satisfied anymore with just wearing women's clothing. They want to be a woman, but because they get sexual arousal in thinking about it. So that's why it's called autogynephilia. They have a love of thinking of themselves, like having their own, let's say genitalia or female sex characteristics. Okay. And that's a totally different pathway. And so homosexual transsexuals.
Is that more of a, you said philia, which is, I think that means love. So is it more, is it more of a love affection feeling, or is it more of an erotic?
Well, that's a great question, because that's where the controversy exists. If anyone wants to look up Dr. Anne with an E, Anne Lawrence, who's autogynephilic herself, okay, she writes the best 2 papers on the topic, and it covers. So she says for most people, it's erotic, and the experts call it an erotic target location error, meaning that we all have an erotic target. Okay, so as a heterosexual male, my erotic target is women's, sex parts. Okay, or it could be hair or something. Okay, and any fetish, any paraphilia. So let's say someone's into shoes, that's called an erotic. Sorry,
or feet.
Or feet. Yeah, it can be shoes, it can be feet, leather, whatever else. Yeah. That we call that an erotic target location error. And you know what? They shouldn't have used the word error. They should have used variation, because then it's less pejorative. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear people problematizing the term already. It's an error.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Why is it an error? Okay. So let's call it variation, but it's called ETLE, erotic target location error. But let's call it variation. So those desires, instead of being where they're supposed to be, quote unquote, if you think about evolutionarily designed proclivities, they go to something else. Okay. So with autogynephilia, instead of seeing a vagina, a vulva, and going, I want to be inside that, it's I want that for myself. And that's autogynephilia. And so homosexual transsexuals typically transition earlier, maybe late teens, early 20s. Autogynephiles, they don't transition until stereotypically in their 40s or 50s. And it's usually after a crisis, or the stress has become too much, loss of job, divorce, death of parents, illness. Okay, when you have a major
any crisis, it doesn't have to necessarily be oriented to their identity.
Exactly. It's just the stress becomes too much. So what they do is, throughout life, until they have that crisis, they will, again, as I said before, they'll cross-dress, they'll wear clothing underneath or something like that. Maybe every once in a while they go to a club and they'll cross-dress on the outside, externally, but they're able to contain it. But as stress goes, when stress gets too much, the walls break, and then they can't hide it anymore. And then they come out as, they say, I'm transgender. And they unfortunately
find relief, I guess.
Well, that's it. It is. It's, and that's the whole thing. It's almost like an addiction. Okay. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And then they finally kind of give into it. Okay. And the way I've heard some people talk about it, it sounds almost like it's a different identity. Again, the people who recognize I have a paraphilia, they can kind of keep a distance. They can see it as it's a paraphilia. Again, it can cause distress, it can cause dysphoria, but they recognize for what it is. But the people who don't recognize it for what it is, it seems like this other identity starts to form, okay? And they're trying to keep it at bay, but then it sort of takes over when the stress becomes too much. And then they come out, in their, again, 40s, 50s, 60s. Now, Caitlyn Jenner has not said that she's autogynephilic, but many experts believe that she is. Okay, because think about like, who's more manly man than someone who wins the decathlon like in the 70s, right?
Right.
Right. So the thing is, autogynephiles, they don't pass. You see one and you go, that looks like a man in drag. And I don't mean to be insulting, but that's a reality. And so anyway, so that's the two different types that the person asked. Okay. And the thing is, most people don't know. They just go, they're transgender. But once again, they're very different phenomena. And one thing I want to say, this is just very important, because remember I told you that I think there may be a third type.
Okay.
Right. So someone who, and by the way, because the autogynephile, they still like women, right? They still are into women. They're gynophilic. They're autogynephilic and gynophilic, whereas the homosexual transsexual likes men, right? So so much of the talk about this never talks about sexual orientation or, what you prefer. Okay, and they say they're two separate categories. No, they're not. For the vast majority of people, it's pretty clear. Your biological sex, your sense of maleness or femaleness, and your attraction to the opposite sex align perfectly. That's the vast majority of people. And then for some people, they don't all coincide. Okay, but they are correlated in most cases. So people don't like to talk about that aspect. But the autogynephile, and this, I can go on and on. All I'm going to say is this: that Blanchard and Bailey have said that many people who deny being autogynephilic, all right, they say that they're lying, and people go, well, that's really rude. But the research showed that many of these people who claimed, they were into women. Okay, so they were transgender, but they're into women. When you look at their history, and they say, they ask, have you ever cross-dressed before? Never. But you talk to their family members, they go, oh, yeah, they did. Or you talk to their wives, and they go, yes, they do. Or in one study, more than one, but one study I know for certain, these people in this study, they were recruited from a clinic where they were seeking help for their cross-dressing behaviors. And then on the survey, they said, no, I don't cross-dress. Yet they were seeking help for it. So that's why Blanchard and Bailey say that they're lying, because they're denying this. So again, I'm not going to say everyone's one or the other, the taxonomy. There could be a third type, but most of them can fit in. And as Bailey says in his book, he says, if you give me 100 trans people, he says, I doubt if Dr. Blanchard and I agree with them, would disagree on any more than two, where we would both say homosexual, transsexual, autogynephile. We just have to look at them and we can categorize them because they look so different. Okay, and it's not being rude. I'm just telling you that's the reality.
So it's maybe if I throw out an experimental term here, so like a non-identifying autogynephile would be someone who maybe is in denial of that aspect of themselves, and that your understanding is, or maybe sort of these other doctors, their premise is that those people would be better off if they were to accept that as a fact about themselves.
Yes, I would say yes. Now, the only exception to that, you're absolutely right, is Dr. Lawrence. When she wrote about autogynephilia, she describes how, and that's why the philia is nice. She says, you asked earlier about, is it erotic or is it about love? She wrote a paper calling Becoming What We Love. And she said, so for any trans person any male who's biological male who's into women, not men, and they say, I'm not autogynephilic, she says, well, maybe you don't have that strong desire to, that erotic desire, all right? But love has different components, and not all love component is sexual, right? There's the romantic, there's the psychological, there's the emotional. So she says, you might have those aspects and not necessarily the erotic part of it, but you're still autogynephilic. So
there could be a bit of a fear there. Yeah.
A fear?
Well, I'm just thinking, well, I mean, I'm not going to name anybody, but I know somebody who went through similar challenges. And, the one thing that they said was, well, at least I'm not gay.
Right.
Right. So, it's like, so I think that, a person can be concerned that, there are all these things. I don't like, that's where I draw my line, so to
right.
speak. So yeah, it could be the AGP is the line where they're like, no, I'm many things, but I'm not that.
Right. Oh, yeah. Except ironically, if they say that and they are AGP and they're still into women and they're seeing themselves as a woman, they are gay in their mind. They're lesbian, right? They're saying I am lesbian, which really pisses off a lot of, females who are lesbians, because they're saying, don't co-opt our term. That's you're appropriating our identity. right? You can't just say you're a woman because you decide to, that's their argument. So anyway, that's the answer to the question someone asked. It's the most important question because we're talking two totally different types of phenomena. And I'm going to argue right now. I would say that the brains of people with autogynephilia are very different than the brains of homosexual transsexuals. Okay, because we know that the brains of
is there scientific? I was
yes,
reading up for this conversation. I saw something about some kind of a study where they found that there is some difference in the brains or something like that.
Yes. So, and if anyone goes to Sexology Today, Dr. James Cantor's site, he describes it quite well. So there's only been a few neuroimaging studies, not nearly enough. They're small sample sizes usually, and they're often not replicated. And the findings in one study, again, are different from other studies. But what is consistent is gay people, male or female, do have some similarities in their brain with the opposite sex that straight people don't have. So when people talk about, there were some studies that show that trans people did have those, different brains, so to speak. Okay. And it's not pink brain, blue body. It's okay. Forget that. But there were these differences. And so what Dr. Cantor says, and any reasonable person says, yes, the reason they find these differences is that they are the homosexual transsexual. Okay, or they're a lesbian who transitions into male, right? But the reason the brains are different is because of their sexual orientation, not their gender identity. Okay, that's why the difference is. And I saw only one study, where they actually asked the sexual preference of their subjects. Okay, most of these studies don't do that. They just say, are you trans or not? You need to look at, are you gynophilic or androphilic? That's the difference. And one study did that, and they tried to show some differences, but these differences were these random little things here or there. There was nothing consistent, and they couldn't explain why these differences would exist. And it was a small sample size and everything, so I don't give much credence. Now, having said that, I can't get into the research. There's too much and not enough time. But let me just say that they have shown that the same phenomenon that may only contributes, it's only a small percentage of variation, or variability, the same phenomenon that might explain why younger brothers, okay, if you have a sibling of, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 boys, the more brothers you have above you, the more likely you are to be gay if you're a boy.
I've heard that one. Yep. Yeah.
Right. And Blanchard talked about that over 20 years ago. And every new studies have shown that's pretty solid. Okay. Again, it doesn't explain all the variation, but some. Well, that same study showed that it only applies to gay men who are bottoms. Okay. So not dominant, but submissive. So there's something else going on here. It's not just who you're attracted to. It's something about you. Your dominance hierarchy. Okay. Is number one. And number two, here's the crazy thing. In straight men. So if you have older brothers, the same phenomenon, it's called the birth order effect. The same phenomenon that predicts homosexuality in younger brothers as bottoms. If you're a straight man, you have a stronger probability of having a fetish or paraphilia. If you have the same phenomenon, okay. So for gay men, if you're a bottom, it's either gay bottoms or straight men who have paraphilias. So there's something going on here. So would AGPs or have differences in their brains as well? Possibly.
And I wonder if this has been isolated from, if this is nature versus nurture, right? Because if you have 3 or 4 older brothers, you're not going to be on the top of the dominance hierarchy, right? Because you're just smaller, right? Growing up, they're bigger than you, so you're gonna be less dominant just by situation. And so there might be, it could be environmental, because I've heard the original one about the birth order phenomenon with gay men being cited as an explanation for born this way.
Right.
So is that something that bears out in the science, or is that more of a proposed theory?
It's a proposed theory because, again, it only explains some of the variation or variability. We don't know. I mean, I personally believe that for most people, their sexual orientation is biologically determined for most people. Now, there can be some variations, and it's impossible to know for sure. We haven't found a polygenetic code. I don't think it's genetic. It may be. I think it's more either epigenetics, that something's happening and making the genes change, or it's biological. So like, let's say second trimester, when there's the greater impact on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, because they've done studies with rats and other animals where they can manipulate, right? They shoot mothers up with testosterone. They subject them to, we're talking again, animals, not humans, but they subject them to stress and so on. And we see that this can have an effect on the male or female's sexual behaviors. So I do believe that there's something biological in most cases. However,
that sounds also environmental in a way, though, too, doesn't it?
Well, the stress, right? But yeah, exactly. So it's so hard, and I know and some people say, well, it's nature nurture. So maybe you have that predisposition, but you need certain experiences to treat. Who knows? Because I know some gay people, or there's many, many, many gay people who were raised in a totally straight environment, never had an opportunity to explore anything else like that, and they know they've known for a long time they were gay. Like there was something different when they were younger because they weren't sexually active, but they felt different. And then when they started to develop sexual feelings, they never ever thought, oh, I might like girls. It was always boys, for example. So who knows what it is? And anyone who claims they know is a liar, because there's no conclusive evidence one way or the other. There's a lot of supporting evidence, but there's not conclusive evidence. I argue on the side of biology and most. By the way, little side note here, Brian, just an interesting thing, because I love to throw this out to people. I know we're getting a little bit off of the trans issue, but it's all related in one way or another. Women, studies show this with using recordings, what's called a plethysmograph. It's an instrument that you stick into the vagina. It measures sexual arousal. For men, there's a ring that goes around the penis. It measures tumescence or blood flow and getting engorged or larger. Women, studies have shown, get aroused to a straight woman will be equally aroused to straight porn or gay porn. Okay, like woman on woman or heterosexual porn should be equally aroused. Lesbians will also be almost equally aroused, but lesbians are more interested in woman on woman porn. Okay, but still they have more arousal, whereas men, not all, but most men, right? If you're straight, you get aroused to straight porn, not to gay porn. If you're gay, it's the other way around. Okay, and bisexuals will be aroused, to both types to varying degrees, more than most gay and straight people. So, yeah.
So how does this speak to, there's this, there are things being said now about if a straight man is not interested in having sex with a transgender woman, that they're like the one of the things I've heard is no, that's not a male penis, that's a woman's penis.
Right. Or the cotton ceiling, they say, okay, which is worse than that, right? Straight men, I think we're pretty good. Straight men don't have that many problems in the sense of discrimination, although today it's pretty discreet. A straight white male gets discriminated against, but in general, straight men have not had such issues. Lesbians are being impacted more. So I'm just going to switch the same question, but switching it to lesbians, okay. The cotton ceiling. So many lesbians are being told, and I've spoken with so many, are being told, how homophobic or how transphobic are you? Okay. And sometimes they say homophobic, that you are not interested in a biological male who identifies as female, still has the penis, okay, still has the body, but it's a woman's penis, as you say, okay? And lesbians are being shamed and they're being forced into like that you should like them.
Right. So it's sort of a double indemnity.
Yes.
Yes. Someone who's sort of flipped their orientation on one side and someone on the other side who's also flipped their orientation. You think that they would mesh, but maybe they don't. Yeah.
Well, and again,
so the thing for me is, I mentioned earlier on, somebody called me a biological essentialist, but right. I think that the only person who's really going to call you that is somebody who's maybe a biological denialist.
Yeah.
Because it's a thing, it's a fact. Now, how you identify in relation to that, that's a whole other story, right? What your gender expression is, what your philias are, whatever your preferences are for, your, what is it, the target, or what was that term you used?
Erotic target location.
Erotic target location. So, that can vary, but is that not to some degree based on some biological, pre-existing thing, right? Whether you want to modify that or not, right?
Right, exactly. And so that's why lesbians get so offended where they're saying, wait, if you're telling me that being lesbian is a social construct? No, I know on the most biological fundamental level what I'm attracted to. And it's not just it's not what you say, it's how you look, it's how you smell, it's how you feel, right? I've had lesbians who said that that's how they really knew, because Many gay people, as we know, try to fit in, are confused, they desperately want to be straight, right? For whatever reasons, societal, cultural, family. So, they try what they can. And because, as I said, women seem to be biologically designed to be bisexual, okay, they can more easily relate to either behavior. But lesbians have told me that when it came down to it, like truly the smell, that's what they say, and that you don't get much more biological than that. And we've lost most of the power of smell as humans. Other animals is much more powerful, and that's why pheromones don't seem to work like they used to work with humans. Don't ever buy pheromone cologne or perfume. It's a ripoff. Just I'm letting everyone know. Okay. There's no good evidence on that, but we're smell animals to a tiny, tiny degree. So when you're up close and with somebody, okay. So I've had lesbians say when they tried it both, they realized, because they were with men their whole lives, and then they were with women, they go, wow, they even smell different. I'm not talking perfume, just the sweat, everything like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's as innate as you get when you can put that level. And so for trans people to say, not all trans people, but the ones who are pushing an agenda saying, how dare you? No, you should still like them because they say they're women. So go against your biological, innate drive and like them. Otherwise, you're transphobic. You're a monster. You're a hateful person. That's ridiculous. And the lesbians are the ones who are getting it the worst. I'm telling you right now, because also, as I was saying earlier, there are some parents, I think I said this, I said in class earlier, some parents truly who would rather have a girl who becomes a boy than to say I have a lesbian, like I have a lesbian daughter. Okay, how retrograde have we become? So,
right. Well, definitely a lot of social pressure there too, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of these cases, and certainly the straight cisgender person, has life a lot easier without all of those things to navigate. But I see, and I think we all want to figure that out, right? Especially us. Well, I mean, maybe not everybody again, right? But I think most well-intentioned, well-meaning people want to figure that out and do it in a way that, maybe is easier to understand than it actually is, and to get along and to live together. But I think there's this push to go the extra mile for rights, trans rights, etc. And now we have things like trans women competing in sports, and so now we're in a position where politically we're at odds with what used to be the progress of women's rights, women being biologically native women, right, as opposed to a newer definition that includes other types of women. So where what happens there? Is this something where is this actually a good thing, where the definition of women is being expanded, or are we now actually edging out women? And is this a situation of men dominating women again in a different way?
Well, you want to talk about science, you talk about like biological denialism, okay, or denialists. When it comes to athletics, the mental gymnastics, pardon the pun, that I see people engaging in to try to say it's okay for a biological male to perform or to compete with women in most sports is ridiculous. It's just the credible studies have shown that if you're suppressing testosterone for a couple of years, after they've gone through puberty, after they've had years and years of bone density and muscle twitch action and speed and body size and everything, they've shown that the degree of change when you're suppressing their testosterone in a biological male, right, it's not sufficient to eliminate the advantage. So, but I'm seeing people, and the people who are promoting this the most, they just happen to be trans athletes themselves, right? You don't think there's any self-interest in that? And I'm not going to name names, but there's a number of them, who've competed at high levels. And the point is, and people say, well, okay, well, how many people are really being affected? Well, quite a few, okay, especially if you're a high school student, you're an athlete, and you're looking for a scholarship or something like that. There's a state where 15 of the top track and field records are for females are held by two people, and they both happen to be biological males who identify as females. I don't think they've been on testosterone, on puberty blockers, I don't think. But even if they were, they already went through puberty as biological males. they have that advantage. And so these girls are losing out on opportunities. And if it's combat sport or if it's rugby or something like that, we've seen the pictures, we've seen, that these are people. I don't know how many true males how many males would truly transition just so they can get a scholarship or something like that. So I don't think they're doing it maliciously. But it's not fair to impose on women's sports. And there was a reason Title IX in the States and in other places where we have, distinctions in categories, there used to not be female sports at all. It was the domain of males. And then people said, wait a second, athletics are good. They're healthy. They promote, so many great social opportunities and so on. So why not allow females to come in? In order to do that, however, we needed to change the rules. We need to isolate females because we know on average, the vast majority of females, athletically speaking, once they hit puberty, are far inferior to males. No offense, women, but even Serena Williams, the world's greatest female, it was either Serena or Venus, admitted that she would be really, really lowly ranked against them.
With John McEnroe.
Sorry.
I think it was John McEnroe. He said something about where would you place Serena Williams, and he says, something like 300.
Well, but I thought Serena Williams herself said that.
Yeah, and so there was a big flap about it where, I think any reasonable person would say, yeah, because they are in different leagues and, there's different performance levels. And it's not meant to be, an insult to anyone, but it's just like, okay, well,
the reality,
that's just a truth.
Yeah. And by the way, just back to the change room thing for a second, just again, I want to be clear because I don't want people to misconstrue. As I was saying, because I did a talk a few months ago about this as well with another group. And because I think it was the Israeli army, they were having this debate that trans people should be able to change and everything with trans women should be with biological women. And I said, look, even if 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 100,000 trans women are rapists or are going to take advantage of this or something like that, I said, okay, so it's not fair to besmirch all trans people, of course.
No.
But why should we put all biological females at risk or to be feeling threatened by this? Right? It's you're trying to. Same with sports.
But here's an interesting corollary though. Why do we what about straight men? Like why are those bathrooms separated to begin with? Is it not an insult to straight men to assume that just a straight man in a woman's bathroom is going to want to rape them? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a similar thing. I think we've sort of just taken for granted that they're separate bathrooms.
Well, and there are some countries where they change together and families change and they're okay with nudity and so on. And if for many generations that's how people learn to cohabitate and to be that way, fine. But to suddenly change it, there are again, to me, I don't feel insulted because I know statistically speaking, there will be a certain proportion of straight men who will assault women. Given the opportunity, they will do that. So I don't mind saying, okay, let's have separate bathrooms. Why? Because why should I put anyone at risk? Same with the sports, okay? Like, why should I, for 0.0 something percent of the population, why should I put 50% of females, in a disadvantage to accommodate that tiny proportion? Now, by the way, if there was a kid who's identifies as trans at school, which they do, right? Accommodating them, letting them use the teacher's washroom or having a third bathroom or a unisex bathroom where I like the unisex bathroom idea where you have male, you have female and unisex. And if you want to go to unisex, go ahead, whether you're trans or not. I like that idea because again, for a poor child who just is trying to figure themselves out and everything, right? I don't want them to have a harder life. I want them to be able to navigate.
See, and it is so hard to even propose a solution like that because then you get accused of othering.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I actually one time I was in a thread on Twitter, and somebody was proposing something about changing ID so that it had there's male, female, and other.
Right.
And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to say that's fine. Like if you can't tell and you don't know, whatever for whatever reason, if there's maybe you don't want to be either, okay, other is okay. Maybe it can be TBD, right? And the moment I said that, I got swarmed on by a bunch of the whole tag team of intersex people came in and they said, no, we're not other, we're human beings. And they went on this whole thing about how, no, we are definitely male or female. If you look down closely enough, you'll find it out one way or the other. And it's defined. And they really hate the idea of being unpersoned as a gender or a sex.
Right.
So it really is a can of worms, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And again, good-hearted, good-minded people, right-minded people don't want to hurt people. We want to find a compromise, but it's impossible to accommodate everybody. And by the way, it's interesting. I'm going to go with the DSD, the difference in sex development. And this is something that Dr. Alice Dreger told me when I had her on my YouTube channel. She said that here's the great irony. While the trans activists are pushing earlier and earlier transitioning, and we haven't got to that. Maybe next time we speak, I can talk about that.
Sure.
But while they're pushing for earlier transition for trans people, or kids who say they're trans, okay, people with difference of sex development have been pushing for later assigning. Like I said, that's a true assigning at birth, because the doctors would prematurely, they would make a decision and they had some guidelines, and many times the doctors were wrong. So, right, and so they said, let a child figure out, am I male, am I female? Let the child figure it out. They may have odd genitalia. They may need surgery later in life, but who's going to necessarily be looking, right? And so why put them in a pathway which might be totally wrong? So that's the irony. Difference of sex development people are saying, let us wait, let us choose. Transgender activists are going, no, push them really soon, which, just because I want to say very clearly, because there's lots of statistics out there and a lot of them are wrong or misleading. Let me just tell you, the highest number that I've seen, and even WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, their Standards of Care Guideline 7, so SOC 7, even they admit that that up to 94% of kids, up to 94% of kids, if they say they're transgender, or there's a caveat here, okay, but if they say they're transgender, up to 94% after they hit puberty or before puberty, they're going to say, I'm not transgender. Okay, 94%. Now, what they say is that the study that found 94%, most of those kids, or a large percentage of those kids, weren't trans. They just were gender non-conforming, and maybe their parents freaked out, brought them to the clinic or whatever. So they're absolutely right that we shouldn't say, 94% are going to desist. However, the fact is, if we're not allowed to investigate properly, if we're not allowed to assess and do therapy, and because it's called conversion therapy, how do we know whether a child who claims to be trans or who's gender non-conforming, how do we know what they're going to be? Why are we pushing for earlier and earlier transitioning when the most conservative estimate, okay, I'm talking about the most conservative estimate, puts it at 54%. Okay, so we're talking with the clearest defined guidelines where we go, okay, this kid truly meets the criteria for gender dysphoria, and we could say that this child currently identifies as trans. At the bare minimum, 54% of those kids will say, I'm not trans. It's either 54 or 56. I'm off on the number, okay? They're not trans. So over half. So why would we push when we know that over half of the kids will not be trans? And you're putting them on hormone blockers or cross-sex hormones that can make you infertile, that can cause irreversible damage, never mind surgery. Okay. And by the way, even again, there's not one doctor.
Some of I've been reading about this in preparation for this conversation. There are a number of different negative effects that come from that can be lasting. And in fact, a child, even if they decide they want to transition back later in life, they can still be dependent on hormones for the rest of their life, one way or the other. I understand that there are increased risk of heart attack,
bone density,
cancer, all kinds of different. Can you? I don't know if you know what these risks are.
I think there's 30 some odd risks. Okay, so the heart attack, the bone density issues, there can be brain development. Okay, but I'm not an endocrinologist, but I've read them, and so it's like 30 something effects. And the fact is, if you have an unhealthy body, if your organs are producing, hormones improperly, then puberty blockers, if you have precocious puberty, for example, puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy, that can help a body that's dysfunctioning. But never in the history of humanity have we used hormones like this with healthy organs. And a friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Laidlaw, who is an endocrinologist, he went to the Senate or Congress and he said in the States, he goes, as an endocrinologist, I devoted my life to helping people with unhealthy organs function properly. Now I'm being forced to destroy healthy organs with all these puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. And two things about that. Cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, there's enough risks. Cross-sex hormones, infertility. There's a risk of infertility. So a child who may be 8, 10, 12, 14 making these decisions. So I just want to say a few things about that so people know this.
Sure.
Look look up Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy. It's Johanna. I got a Freedom of Information Act document through Dr. Laidlaw, where she showed, and I'm not making this up here, she got clearance through the UCLA last year or the year before to do a study where they're looking at the effects of not puberty blockers, remember that's step one, but cross-sex hormones on children as young as 8 years old. 8 years old. So you're going to give children at the age of 8 the decision to sterilize themselves for the rest of their lives at 8 years old? She said originally was 13 years old. That was bad enough. But then she said, what if a kid's going through precocious puberty and we don't want them to have to go through puberty? So suppress and then cross-sex hormones. Age of 8. Insane. Number 2, she also was part of a study. She didn't do this, but she had people in her study afterward where she looked at the effects of double mastectomy. You want to talk about irreversible. So the youngest person in her study who had a double mastectomy for gender-related issues was 13 years old. When she was 14 in the study, but they had to have 1 year since the surgery. So she had a double mastectomy at the age of 13. And Dr. Kennedy is on tape saying, well, if they change their mind, they can just get them put back on. Okay, that's what she said. That's so callous and cavalier.
Yep, I've heard of that.
Right?
So,
Okay.
so let's play the steelman argument for a moment here.
Okay.
So let's say you yourself as a psychologist, you've assessed a child and you feel that they're a good candidate. I don't know if that's something.
I would never say that. Nope.
Okay. Well, so let's say that there is someone who does that, and let's say that by all current standards that are acceptable in the community, that child is a viable candidate. What is the worst thing that can happen to harm that child by not engaging in these interventions?
The worst that can happen. Okay, so I want to be very clear here. There's not one psychologist, honest doctor, psychologist ever, who can say with 100% certainty that they know whether this child is a viable candidate. Just so you know. They can say viable, but as a pure candidate, they don't know. Yeah, so what is the harm?
Hypothetically, as to play devil's advocate here, right? Because because sure. I mean, again, right? You said at the top here, we're going to be accused of being transphobic, et cetera. So let's try and put forward the best argument from that perspective. That there's a child who's identifying, they've been persistent for, let's say, 2 years. They're they're insisting their identity. They're taking on a name. They're doing the behaviors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've chosen that they want to be the other sex. And they're, let's say, 15 years old. What is the worst thing that would happen to them if they do not take those hormones until they're 18?
Okay, so the worst thing, and here's the problem, that this is the first thing that doctors say or gender therapists say. The worst thing is suicide. Okay? Having said that, if you ask me, what is the worst thing if a child who at 15 years old wants to get a tattoo, and you say no, there will be some children who are have mental health issues who will kill themselves over that. Okay, so to use the worst case scenario, right, as the guiding, as the thing that compels us to act certain ways doesn't make sense. Obviously, nobody wants someone to kill themselves, right? So now. And people say, well, come on, tattoo and this are different. Yes, I understand. I'm not saying all trans kids are, have mental health issues, but we know a number do. And they go, well, that's because they're transgender and people didn't accept them. No. In some cases, yes. In some cases, the way the family reacted or society reacted caused their distress, maybe to the point, tragically, of suicide. But the fact is, many of these children, and there's a whole other category that we're not going to be able to have time to get into, who they've been shown to have autism, depression, anxiety, trauma, ADHD, OCD, neurodivergent brains, where they're more susceptible to, unfortunately, suicide. But if it's not suicide, which is it's a minority, by the way, when people say that these rates are so high, the fact is this is not suicide completion in most cases. It's suicidal attempt or ideation. And if you look at any statistics of any mental health condition, the numbers are essentially the same. We're talking 40%. And even if you look at go to any school today, and they had the study, we're talking in the 30%. If you ask kids, have you ever thought of suicide or death or killing yourself? The way you ask it, you can easily get the same numbers in non-trans kids as well. But for these more serious attempts, or unfortunately completions, yes, trans kids are at a higher risk, but they're at no higher risk than other mental health populations, like mental health issue populations. So
what do you think about scenarios where a child is being coached to pull a stunt or feign suicide attempt, or
It's reprehensible, and there are websites that train them to do this. Okay, it's just disgusting, and this it's terrible, and they're doing that just to, again, to get the treatment sooner, or to blackmail their parents, so to speak. Now, how do we know which one's being coached, and how do we know which one is sincere? I don't want to be the gatekeeper on that one. I don't want to make the wrong decision. And by the way, I don't, just so people are clear, I don't treat children. I work with families, and I work with adolescents and adults, like older adolescents and adults. So I would never even be in a position to do that, just so we're clear. I don't want to, try to present myself as someone I'm not. But I've worked with many people who have worked with these children.
Right.
And again, so the suicide is the worst case. But if it's not suicide, it is dysphoria. It's extreme discomfort, or there's discomfort or distress at their body, at their sense of being, and so on. And I get that. I'm compassionate toward that, right? No one wants a child or teen or anyone to have to go through that. So that's what we're looking at. It's a long struggle, and unfortunately, they become obsessed with it. I'll tell you right now, though, the people who work with kids like that, if they're allowed to work with them, as soon as they help the children not focus so much on their gender identity, and they work on other things, for example, trauma or school, or other issues, or family dynamics and stuff. When they work on that, and gender doesn't is not the be all end all, so many of those children, their pressures are alleviated, and they're doing better. They may still feel like the opposite sex, but it doesn't become they don't become encompassed by it. They're able to focus on another world, because that's the problem. And I've had again, transgender patients where I said, look, I'll help you navigate whatever you're doing. I said, but we can't let this become the be all end all, because I've seen what happens. Your world becomes just this very narrow
Right.
thing, and it's all distress, and it's all, and think about it. If your whole life
becoming an obsession, right?
it becomes an obsession, and think about it. It's an obsession of something that I am not. It's like perfectionists. Perfectionists are highly susceptible to depression, because all they ever see is what they're not. They see all the imperfections. So imagine if all you're thinking about is, I want to be a girl, I want to be a girl, I want to be a girl, and you know that you're not a girl physically. That's all you're looking at, is what I'm not. How can you not feel distress? Right? So we try to get them so it doesn't become the only focus. So that's what, and it's, again, I'm not minimizing. I want everyone to understand, any child or adolescent going through this, it's a struggle. Let's not downplay. And I know you're not, right? I have nothing but compassion, but I want to find the best way to help people deal with this. And there are people who've worked with far more people than I have said we've had success in looking at the other phenomena in their lives, and other mental health issues that might be contributing to this feeling. Okay, and that's my concern, that people aren't taking that consideration. By the way, one more thing that people don't think about when we talk about puberty blockers, right? Think about this.
Yeah.
Puberty is such an important stage. Think about like a caterpillar metamorphosizing into a butterfly. Well, puberty is something we all go through. We change, our bodies change. Now we become, childbearing, or potentially, depending, on your health or whatever. Okay, but it's such an important transition in life. And it's not just biological, it's social, and it's psychological. And your brain goes through this massive development when you're going through puberty, right? The hypothalamus is on fire, the pituitary glands and everything. And so if you suppress that process with hormone suppressors or Lupron, okay, puberty blockers, you are delaying this person's normal development psychologically, emotionally, and socially, interpersonally.
And physically, of course.
And physically, of course, as well.
Yeah,
So
even if you set aside gender, you're still blocking that person from becoming physically an adult.
Right, and again, and all the things that come along with it, but again, psychological. So whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years on these hormone suppressors, what are you doing? You are throwing off a person's development. Now, if you have precocious puberty, right, and your hormones are too much, and you bring them down, fine. Now you're at normal level. That's what they were meant for. But to bring it below that, we don't know what it does psychologically, and we have to find honest clinicians. I'm not saying that the ones who do research aren't, but we need ones who are not activists. We need ones who truly look at what are the real impacts, again, physically, psychologically, socially, interpersonally.
So there's more research to be done, because one of the things I read is that this, and again, you can tell me if they're wrong, but I've seen some people saying that a lot of these interventions are experimental. They don't really know what it's going to do. And so, I'm going to try and squeeze in part of our original agenda here of talking points with whatever time we have left. But, if the government is giving power to make decisions on behalf of children, through doctors to engage in these interventions. I think that there should be a really high standard of criteria to evaluate that those children are indeed legitimate candidates, and there should be some extraordinary amount of certainty before you engage in something that is a biological intervention with a child. And what's happening in Vancouver with this case that we were going to talk about is without even the awareness of a parent, never mind the consent or agreement, not even their awareness. There's something subversive about that doesn't fit right with me, not to mention just sort of like the role of the state in personal decisions. To do something to a child that I don't think it's to the benefit of the child. I think, the statistics that you mentioned, the 94%, or even if you look at the Sucker and Brightly 20%, ambiguity gap, where there's 20% where they don't know because they didn't follow through. If you give it as much as 20%, you still have 80% of the people that would normally just go back to gender nonconforming behavior. And so what you're doing is you're taking these people and you're biologically modifying them, because they're not agents of that. If they're if they're children, you could say that maybe a teenager maybe has a little more agency than a 5-year-old, for example, or 8-year-old, as you cited earlier. But if the state is going to be doing these things without consent or even awareness of the parents, and they're going to be giving doctors and endocrinologists the authority to inject children with these treatments, I think that we need to have a higher standard of what allows them to do that. In fact, I think a lot of those things are things that should not exist. I don't think that the state should have the ability to do that without the knowledge of the parent. That's insane. I mean, if the state has nothing to hide and they're doing it truly in the interest of the child, then they should be able to come forward and say, here are the reasons, and we're going to be transparent about it. There's a case in Vancouver now where a father is in jail right now.
Yes. Robert Hoogland. Right,
because he is opposing exactly that, right? So he has a child. I don't know how much I can say openly here, because they actually put a publication ban on him, and he's in jail because he broke that ban by naming some the people that were involved, the doctor, and he he misgendered his child by referring to the child as his daughter when the child is now identifying as male. I don't know. Even if describing that, if I'm in trouble, I don't know. So he's in jail for that, and while his case is pending, and it's all because he wants to say, whatever the case is with my child, I don't think we should engage in these biological interventions because of the health risks, and let the child decide when they're 18, when they're an adult, and they can make that choice for themselves. I don't think that the risk-benefit analysis is really taking all things into account. And and in this case, it's even more complicated because both parents disagree. So I think we are really in an ethical conundrum. I think we're in the legal precedent is really, really disturbing. I know a few years ago, Jordan Peterson took a lot of heat for saying, the use of pronouns are going to be compelled, and I read some things about what C16 said at the time. And, I thought, well, it's just about including transgender people as a protected class under civil rights. And I think that's fair enough. Right.
Right.
And, but most of the criticism I saw of Peterson was just all ad hominem, and there was really nothing on the basis of the law or the premise of what he was putting forward. Now we see, maybe his prediction was correct. People are going to jail. And I just wanted to touch on that because I know you took a little heat for defending Peterson back in the day. I don't know if you want to comment on any of the stuff I just said.
Yeah, a little heat. No, I took a lot of heat. And that kind of set me on this path of being a pariah among my colleagues and in the media eventually, because, I saw what he was saying back in October 2016. And I recognized that when he first described it, he was clumsy. He's so intelligent that when people asked him questions, he gave the correct answer, but he wasn't, he wasn't thinking about the recipients of the information. Okay, he was thinking that he's talking to people who understand processing like he does. And so he was too blunt. And so when people ask me, like, would you call someone by the right, the pronoun they want and everything like that? He was being honest. He's going, well, if they're going to be a jerk about it, no. Okay, if they're respectful, yes. But he wasn't very socially savvy at the time. So it took him many interviews, many interviews, to be able to modify his statement to capture what he really wants to say. And I made a podcast shortly after he came out, and I said, here's what he should have said, right? Because it's not anti-transgender. I don't know Dr. Peterson that well, but I know him well enough to know he's not a transphobe at all, right?
I saw that when I saw that video of him being confronted at I think it was
U of T. No.
I think he responded with remarkable restraint. If I had that many people in my face, I don't know that I would have responded as well as him. And I'm glad I'm not, that question is not being tested. And hopefully that won't happen as a result of this video. But
Right.
But it seems like his prediction was correct. And he goes into a whole lot of different areas and ideological framing. But here we are, 2021. A father is in jail for not using, well, it's not entirely for not using the pronouns. It was a behavior ban as well as a ban on talking about the names of certain people involved with the case, which to me seemed like, I don't know what the reason they would have for that is. It doesn't seem like the public interest is served by no transparency in that.
Well, there's a few things, because the quote that the judge had threatened him, and you're right, it was because he violated publication bans and naming people and his child as well. And I can understand that because he put pictures of the child, and in the child's interests, I don't know if I would put my child's face everywhere because, I want them to have their privacy. But the judge did say before he was jailed, months before, the year before, the judge did say, if you refer to your child as a she, and if you use the child's, if you dead name the child, if you use the child's name that you had given, right, you will go to jail. So that was a threat that was imposed on him. And going back to Jordan Peterson, people were claiming that he was saying that if you accidentally call somebody the wrong pronoun, that you're going to go to jail. He never said that, okay, right? That's not what he said. Like you said a few minutes ago, the fact that I can be compelled to have to use a pronoun or something, that's the problem. We do it out of civility. We do it because we're nice, whatever else like that, right? But to be forced to have to do it is something different. And by the way, in the States just yesterday, I believe, I don't know if you saw it, there's a story, teacher, it was court. The teacher went to court because the teacher there was a conflict because of, I think it was university, a student demanded that he use their pronouns, and he's very religious, so he refused. He said, I think it was a male who said that they're female. And he goes, you're a biological male, and my religion is not going to let me, call you otherwise. So they had come to an arrangement where he would just use the person's last name. Okay. And that was it. But he was so upset at this, the teacher went to the court, and just yesterday in the States, the Supreme Court said that, the teacher has the right to be able to call this student by a certain, by whatever pronoun he chooses, because that's part of his faith. And they said, otherwise it is compelled speech. So in America, they're trying to strike this balance as well. Canada, I think, we're failing. When Jordan Peterson in 2017, around this time, 4 years ago, to this day almost, he went to the Senate also for Bill C-16. I don't know if you saw that. He and Dr. Gad Saad and a few other people and a lawyer, I should know his name, damn it, Jared Brown. Okay, they went to the Senate and they showed all the inconsistencies in the legislation and in the philosophy and the ideology and so on. And they said that it was going to be a nightmare, and they didn't change it at all, right? And so. Again, it's not like if I misgender somebody accidentally, am I going to go to jail? No. But the fact that a parent can be compelled, and by the way, you can also, I've done over 500 cases for children's aid societies and the courts, child protective services. So I know how they operate. And most cases are not abuse, they're neglect, whether it's physical needs, or mental health, and so on. So now the children's aid societies across Canada, and aside from BC, I'm not sure all the other provinces, but in Ontario, they're not a government organization. They are government paid, but they are private organizations. Children's aid societies in Ontario are private organizations that are paid by the government. They now have the right to intervene. And if a child goes to school and says, my mom won't accept the fact that I am a boy or a girl or whatever, the school by law is now, the parent is harming the child. By law, they're compelled to call Children's Aid Society. And, and once Children's Aid Society gets involved, and I've seen many cases where it's a nonsense case, but the parent got upset right? They resisted. They tried to assert their rights, and something that should have been resolved very quickly suddenly became this crazy long case, and the family's torn apart. Kids are put into foster care or whatever else. And by the way, 3 years ago in Ontario, the age of children's involvement rate was raised from 15. Like as soon as you turn 16, you're no longer part of their purview, but now it's 18. So now there's 2 more years. So if a 17-year-old child says, my parents not accepting my my identity, Children's Aid Society can be called in. The schools can come in and they can do that. And you can tear families apart. So we have to be so.
It's a bit of a Kafka trap, doesn't it? When a parent resists, and that's proof of their bigotry or something.
Right, exactly.
But you need to take into account these things like the biological interventions. And, if anybody's going to defend their child, then it should be the parent, right? And the interesting thing is, I had a conversation about this topic online, and, we were talking about, well, who should get the final say? It was actually in an anarchist group, right? Because you talk about, the non-aggression principle. You do whatever you want, just don't harm another person. But what happens when everybody involved is well-intentioned? Right? Because now you don't have a bad actor, but they're at odds. So who's the tiebreaker? I would think it should be a parent, unless there's harm being done. And I think that by and large, when you weigh the risk and benefit of a physical intervention on someone's life, that I think probably the weight and balance is in favor of waiting. Let the child wait till they're an adult, unless it's really, really dire. Like, I'm sure there'd be an exception case. But to do it in the absence of the parent's awareness and just spirit someone away, I think that's horrible that's happening, especially with the consequences. And now we're getting, the Tavistock case where you're finding out that, the people are pushing them in a certain way. And like, we need to know that if the people are acting in good faith for these children, because you're not helping trans people if you're chemically castrating them or sterilizing them prematurely or incorrectly, right? If you're misdiagnosing, I think I heard somewhere in the United States that the third highest cause of death or something, or some harm done to people is misdiagnosis. So
I wasn't aware of that stat, but okay.
Again, this is just casual conversation, but if misdiagnosis is something that can happen so frequently, I think we should be careful in that area. And again, I'm not saying I'm unsympathetic to a trans person who's got an issue. I've known a few people in my life, and I don't deny that they have something going on. It's foreign to me. I don't experience it, but I can empathize. I can put my mind in a place where I can think, what if I felt uncomfortable in my body perpetually? That would suck. Right. So let's do something to help these people. What can we do? Like, if it's something psychological, great, I'll reach out for that. But if the people I'm reaching out to for help are programmed to push me in one direction and one direction only, and the reverse stick shift does not exist on the car, that's the scary thing.
Yeah, let me add 2 things to that. Number one, but people have to understand that when you talk about this, so even if we go, okay, well, let's just put them on puberty blockers. So, and again, we've already talked about there are more harms than they claimed, and that's why Tavistock and the NHS took that claim off the website. On the website, I don't know if I said this to you. I said this morning to my class, so I'll just did I say this already about Tavistock?
You mentioned something about Tavistock.
Okay, did I say about that they on their website in October or November they took it off? I don't know if that was before we came on air or not.
Actually, I'm not sure now.
Okay, so I'll just, if I repeat myself, I'm sorry, but they used to claim up until October or November of 2020 that puberty blockers were completely harmless and reversible, right? And now we're realizing, nope, that's why they took them off. Lawsuits are coming. But so a couple of things about that. With the puberty,
if you have your breasts amputated, you can just get new ones.
Exactly, that's right, Johanna. Simple, right? So, where was I going with that? There's 2 things. Oh yes, so. So puberty blockers, people are trying to pass them off as harmless, reversible, and so on. And even if they were, which they're not, the fact is that 99 to 100%, depending on which study you look at, of people who go onto puberty blockers go to cross-sex hormones. Now, what the trans activists will say is that's proof that it's the right course, it's the right direction. So there you go. Whereas a critical thinker would say, wait a second, if someone has invested all this energy in saying, I want to be this opposite sex and I want to be, and you put them on puberty blockers, and again, you're delaying the development and so on, and you're preventing them from seeing what it might be like, to grow into a male or a female body, and they haven't had that experience, so they don't know physically, psychologically, or socially what it's like, and they might actually like it, or they might be able to work with it, right? Then, and they've put so much effort, and they've said to their parents or and everyone else, I need him. Find me the child or the adolescent who's going to be able to go, oh yeah, sorry, no, I'm going to stop now. I don't need those cross-sex hormones. You're guaranteeing that they're going to go to cross-sex hormones, essentially. The stats show it. 99 to 100% will go to cross-sex hormones, and that's where you get the sterilization. So even if puberty blockers are harmless, you would be going on to the next stage, which is not harmless. And as you were saying a few minutes ago, the risk of misdiagnosing, this can have lifelong consequences, number one. And then number two, for people to really understand this, forget the tattoo analogy I gave earlier. When I used to do assessments for children's aid societies, one of the controversies we had were whether a parent should put a kid on ADHD medication. Right? So in some cases, the child truly it was very obvious. They had what I call true ADHD. It's neurodivergent. There's something going on here. And the more I've worked with people who have ADHD, it's not just emotional dysregulation in some cases. It's wow. Trying to live that way is very difficult. Whereas other people, it's only emotional dysregulation and they get misdiagnosed. And especially kids, if you got a boy who's a bit hyperactive, you give him the drugs, dope him up. Well, yeah, dope him up. You give him the speed. Okay. So the point is, in some cases, it was clear that this child could not function without the medication. All right. So if a parent says, no, I'm not putting him on this medication, in those cases, I'm going, well, you know what? It is in the child's best interest. However, I never held it against a parent, especially in the cases where it's just emotional dysregulation, where the parent says, wait a second, they're only like this when they're with their, let's say, like with their mom. When they're with dad, they're totally fine because they're active, they're doing whatever. They don't have these problems. So this is, look, ADHD medication, whether it's Adderall, Ritalin, whatever, it's a stimulant. It's one molecule away from crystal meth, basically. So, so with such powerful medication, I made it clear in my reports that they were saying that this was experimental. They don't want to give their children 6 years old, 4 years old, 8 years old, these medications. Some parents are okay with it. Some parents are not. So I said, let's give them that right. Okay. And again, if the child can't function without it and nothing the parent's doing, no interventions working, then maybe the parent might want to think to use the medication. But until that point, I respected the parents, as long as the parent gave me a good argument and they showed that they'd done their research and they were concerned about it, right? So that's just, and that is reversible.
Informed consent.
Informed consent on behalf of the child.
And,
yeah. So why would we deny parents the right to do that with hormones? Okay, hormone suppressor, cross-sex hormones, which are not reversible, the cross-sex hormones. Okay. So, or they still have their impact, I should say, so anyway, that's what people need to really think about. And it's all, so much of this is agenda driven. And by the way, again, remember I talked about the conflation about the homosexual, transsexual, and AGPs. Again, I don't want to tarnish everybody, because if you have AGP and you accept it and everything like that, all the power to you, right? As long as you can learn to manage it and it doesn't, destroy your life. If you're able to live with it and maybe even be fine with it, great. I'm happy for you. But this whole born in the wrong body thing, this is what a child says when they don't have the words to explain what they're going through.
What they're feeling, right?
Right. But an adult, the AGPs, the reason that they're really pushing this, they're born in the wrong body narrative, and say that we have evidence, and look, this fish species, they transition and they can be male and female. And okay, now we're looking at cross species comparisons and everything like that. Right. The fact is, many of the AGPs are doing this because if you say, no, I'm born in the wrong body, I was born this way, basically, then it detracts from this. Wait a second. Aren't you being driven by a paraphilia? Isn't that's what is, so it's able to shift the focus and say, no, geez, what are you talking about? No, I was born this way. Right. And then they use, again, the homosexual, transsexual to go, see, this kid was like, 3 years old. That was like me. I was just like that child. I knew from the day I was a little. Okay. And I just want to throw this at people because I hate to do it, but people have to understand why we can't just blindly trust the so-called experts. I mentioned Johanna Olson-Kennedy and what she's doing with, with the breasts and the puberty blockers. Another name people should look at is Diane Ehrensaft. She is a psychologist, a developmental psychologist in the States, Diane Ehrensaft, Ehrensaft. Go to Fourth Wave now, and they have all the documentation. There's a video of her saying two things. I want people to understand this. When we talk about pushing earlier and earlier, for people who maybe they have good hearts, sorry, not good minds, they have good hearts and they really want to help and they're just misguided, or maybe there's something else going on. I don't know. I'm not going to read their minds, but I am going to say what some of these people say is nonsense. And she said, and she's on recording saying this, somebody asked her, what about children who are nonverbal, whether they have a developmental disability or they're pre-verbal, so they're babies? What about them and their gender identity? And she said they can still express their gender identity even without words. And a clinical psychologist, a child psychologist, said, she gave two examples, I kid you not. One of them was a little child, probably like a girl, was like 1 year old or something. She showed everybody that she's not a girl. She rejected her, her gender and her real identity as a boy because she kept taking her barrettes out of her hair. This is her showing the world, okay? And any parent who's ever had a girl who's had barrettes in her hair says, wait a second, all girls do that at some point. She used that as an example. And the second example, even crazier, was the little boy wearing a onesie. Okay, like, little pajamas that have a snap at the bottom so you can change your diaper. She said, this little boy, he was opening up the snaps and holding it out like a dress. So a 1 year old child has the ability to go, oh, yes, women wear dresses. And therefore, I am going to open my onesie like a dress to show everyone. A clinical psychologist was saying this.
That sounds a little off the deep end to me.
Well, she's the one that they go to for she's an expert that people go to for guidance.
Maybe a little too close to the problem. Maybe infinitely close. But I think it must be a terribly perilous world for people with gender identity issues to live in right now.
Sure.
Because the people that you're turning to that genuinely care and want to help may be taking you in the wrong direction, and other people that really care are being maybe maligned as being bigoted or hostile, when really I think at the end of the day, everybody out there really just wants to help. And I'm not going to say there aren't outliers, and there are people that are just like, they're just genuinely trans or homophobic. I mean, it's a complicated situation, if I see somebody who's not passing and I'm wondering, okay, it's a little weird to me, right? I mean, okay, it's a person, that's fine. And, I'll do everything I can to respect them, but it doesn't naturally match up with my instincts about gender identity. Right. So that's fine. I mean, I'll clumsily find my way through that if I can, as long as I know that, first of all, in my heart, I'm like, that's a person. I'm going to treat them with as much respect as I can. Unless, of course, they turn out to be a jerk, then,
Exactly.
But we have this thing where there's a polarization going on, where if somebody brings up these questions about, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and the best interest of the child's health growing up, regardless of whether you're okay with them being, their identity thing, and it just so happens Hoogland, is a Christian. So you get all of this left-right stuff thrown in there. And these people that have genuine identity problems, they're maybe in a different mental space. They're just trying to deal with being alive and being a human being. And now they're being propped up as a political football. And I really worry for them. And I hope that, we can work this out as a society, as human beings, because I think, let's wait 8-10 years from now, see what happens. You got these things happening in Tavistock. If we have the government of Canada mandating that, these things are happening without any say of the parents, the state is responsible. We just came out and apologized for things we did to children in the past, right? What's going to happen in 10-12 years when we start seeing class action lawsuits from people that were misgendered the wrong way, right? And had a physical intervention on their body. So I guess my point is, we really need to take it seriously. We got to stop labeling each other as bigots or phobic. I don't know, I feel like I'm making almost a closing statement, because I know you only have so much time here, but
I've gone well past the time, but yes.
Yeah, but what do you think of that? I mean, I guess I'm trying to get into the political dimension of it a bit.
Right. Well, and that's the problem. Okay. As I said at the beginning, the people who are supposedly the most progressive, the people who used to be the most open-minded, the ones who wanted the most honest, productive, civil discussion about these things have done a 180 and they're not allowing it. And so as soon as it's an unwinnable argument. It's unfalsifiable because if I say all these things and I say, look, I have transgender patients, my daughter has transgender friends who come over and sleep over and they've got no problem, and I just want to help. They go, oh, that's just you. You're lying, basically, right? That's a cover. Of course you would say that. Like, you can't win. They are so ideologically possessed. And so all you can do is do your homework and do it from a critical perspective. Don't just look at one side, look at both and see what's more compelling. That's what we need to do, number one. And number two, I hate to say it, this is the first time I've said it, okay? And it's the first time I'll ever say in my life. I think the day is going to be saved by lawyers. All right. I think that's a sign of the apocalypse when the lawyers are the ones who okay, because and by the way, a little side note here, I'll be careful, but a couple of years ago, before I was canceled through social on Twitter and from my professional organization, so people need to know this, I was canceled. Please read an article. It's called "Telling the Truth on Trans Issues Got Me Canceled." All right, and I write it all down. It's all documented. I've got the receipts. And before that happened, because I was so immersed in this and I wasn't afraid to speak out, because again, it's not politics for me. I hear from the people who are directly affected. I have been touched by so many bloody stories of wrong decisions or children in distress or getting bad care and so on. So I've been speaking out because it's my ethical duty, I believe, to do that. My organization didn't believe so. They thought I was, being too vocal. In any event, where was I going with this? About this, I just lost my track from my preamble here. It's not about the politics. It's about helping. I'm so sorry, Brian. I just got lost in that. Where was I?
You know what? I think I just want to add, you're a subject matter expert. You should be respected as such. We have people being propped up as experts making decisions about people's lives that maybe don't deserve that title. And yet, you through your practice, you deal with this every day, and I don't know how many patients you've interviewed and talked to on a very deeply intimate level. I think you have an understanding of what's happening. So I think it's horrible that you would be canceled from sharing what you've learned with the world, because I see it in your face. You care about these people, and I think it's horrible that a compassionate voice who has something to say would be ejected from the conversation because some political football is being thrown around. So I don't know if I've taken you off of where you wanted to go.
I remember where I was going with it, by the way. The memory got back. But yes, well, thank you for that. And, more than me, I've worked with a small number of trans people, but I've worked with many people with gender-related issues and sexual-related issues and sexuality and so on. And I've spoken to the experts who've worked with many, many more. So yes, and so I think we should have some standing. By the way, I got canceled from my own profession because I kept fighting and saying, guys, we are the psychologists here. We're the mental health professionals. Let's make a policy statement. Let's speak out and say some of this information is wrong, it's harmful, etc. And I was too vocal. They didn't like how blunt I was because they weren't doing anything, and I got canceled. But what I was going to say was the lawyers. Right? And I remember. So when I was so prominent, I spoke to people would say to me, you have to speak to this lawyer or that lawyer. I spoke to a number of lawyers in Canada and the States. Okay. And I told them all this that was happening. And they all said to me, we had no idea this was going on. And I said, so, because people are saying to me, can you get a class action suit going? So I looked into it, and every lawyer said, we're not going to touch this because we don't want to have our firm tarnished as transphobic. Right. So they all said no. But with the Tavistock case with Kira Bell, that's the first one, and more are going to happen, and more lawyers are going to find their courage, and they're going to take these cases on, and there's going to be hell to pay. And I only hope that it's not about money for me. Okay, I hope that the people, there's two hopes. One is that the people who've led everyone down this path, anyone who's ever done anything unethical, I hope they're held to full account. But more importantly, number two, I hope that this will now take the curtain away and then say, let's put all of our forces together and let's find the best treatment for children, adolescents, and adults to help them deal with something that 99% of the population can't even fathom, but it does affect a small percentage of people, and let's help them. And let's find the right way. No politics. let's do proper mental health care. It's all I care about.
How do you find, from a professional in the space, what is happening behind the scenes? Do you find that there are a lot of psychologists who are like-minded and they're just afraid to speak, or is there just like a vast majority of people that are ideologically motivated, or like
how about all of the above?
Distribution and
yeah. So let me tell you. Sorry, Brian. There's a bit of a delay. So let me tell you how it works. Okay. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, I'm pretty sure that's the name, is the American Academy of Pediatrics. They put out a policy statement a few years ago. Okay. And so people read this and they've said that gender affirming care is the way to go, not watchful waiting. And they put all these papers. And if you go to Sexology Today, Dr. James Cantor tears apart this policy paper, because the point is, in any organization, only a tiny handful of people are experts in certain areas. So they get together, whether it's for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the ICD in Europe and other places, International Classification of Diseases, or a government policy or a hospital policy, whatever the case is, it's a small group of people who say we have the expertise. So they come out and they tell their group or the institution, here's what we've decided. And then others go, well, I'm not an expert, so okay. And they go along with it. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, and I think it was 3 years ago, they put out this policy paper and they claimed that watchful waiting, the approach where you go, hey, if my kid says they're trans, I'm just going to step back, see what happens. I'm not going to hurt them in any way. I'm not going to encourage them in any way. Just let's see what happens. They declared that that's not good, that only gender affirming care is good. And so Dr. Cantor showed, so this was a small group of people within the pediatric community, because there's a lot of pediatricians who go, I don't agree with this. They speak for me, though. They represent, right? So people see this, they go, oh, it's universal. All pediatricians believe this. Well, he showed that all these papers that they claimed supported gender affirming care, if you actually read the papers, they're saying either A, it's watchful waiting, or B, we don't know. None of those papers, maybe one. I don't think none.
How did they get from that to their conclusion?
Ideology, politics. Okay, they didn't think people are going to actually read the papers. They said it was such. Again, go to Sexology Today. Dr. James Cantor, he tore it apart. Okay, so this is how it happens. So again, it's a small group within organizations, and either people go, well, I'm just following what the experts say, or they know it's wrong and they are too afraid to speak out. And you don't know how many colleagues I got when I was still on the Ontario Psychological Association listserv before they banned me for life from the organization. I had so many colleagues writing me back channel saying, I agree with you. I'm not going to speak out, because some of them are just starting out. They don't want to be destroyed. And the older ones are like, well, I just don't know enough about it. I support you. And by the way, most of the people who support me were older, because they're reasonable, because we're raising a generation of mental health professionals who are being guided by ideology. It's the same ideology. I think you know about this, Brian, where 3 years ago or 2 years ago, it was 2 years ago, where the American Psychological Association put out a policy paper on how to work with boys and men. Great. The only problem is, here's the problem. They weren't saying that toxic masculinity is unhealthy. They were saying traditional masculinity is unhealthy. Okay. And I know it's a bit of a tangent here, but it's all related, because we're trying to understand what our roles, when they're basically saying that being stoic, not stoic to the point of I've lost an arm, but I'm going to keep going to work. No, stoic in the sense of I'm not going to break down and cry when there's a crisis, that somehow that is toxic. And that traditional element is toxic. It's unhealthy. And it acts against gay people and trans people. You got to read this paper.
What about cognitive behavior therapy? When something bad happens, you're not supposed to traumatize and
by the way, CBT is good, but also acceptance therapy, where you don't let it become all of you. You're able to create a distance and look at your experience more objectively, rather than what we call emotional reasoning. And if I feel this way, it must be real. No, exactly. We're trying, that's how we've always learned to help people, to expose them to that which they fear. But now in today's society, if there's something that you fear, well, then just shut it out, cancel it. We don't want to see it, right? And that starts in academia, and it bleeds into all other areas. So this is what I'm up against. And it's not just me, it's a small group of people, but it's growing, because they're seeing more people who, like myself. Okay, I'm a bit player. I'm a nobody, but Jordan Peterson, he's up here, and there's other people. I'm down here, but some people see me and they take heart, because I don't have a platform, beyond this, something like this, right? Or I got canceled from social media. I got canceled from regular media. I used to give so many interviews per week, like about 5 interviews a week on TV and radio. Don't do it anymore because
Right.
I'm toxic now. Right. So, and thank goodness the university where I teach, they haven't fired me. And I'm telling you right now, other professors or lecturers, because I'm just a lecturer, I don't have tenure. I have no job security. Right. I could lose it all like that. And I have my friends and family tell me, why are you doing this? You're putting this at risk. And I'm saying, because I'm really hoping, for some reason, I have this faith that somehow the system is not corrupt. Sorry, is not so corrupt that if someone's acting with good intentions and good science and aiming for best practices, that no matter what the ideologues say, no matter what activists or other hateful people say, that they aren't going to so badly misconstrue me that they are going to permanently cancel me, right? Like for my teaching and or my my professional practice. They've tried. Don't think they haven't. You don't know how many times I've had people make false complaints to the to the university and to my college to try to cancel me, right? It's endless, but I have to do it. And it's not because it's not hubris. It's just, if it, who else is going to do it? There are some, there are other people who can do it, but why should I leave it to other people? Right. I have a voice.
The bystander non-intervention effect.
Right. The bystander effect. Exactly. I don't want to be, I don't want to be,
take care of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And if everyone said that, it's not going to be taken care of. So sometimes I get people reach out to me and they go, I've seen your fight and everything like that, and that encouraged them to do that as well. So all I can hope is that more people join in. And I'm telling you, the lawyers, back to what I said earlier, the lawyers, when they get involved, I think we're going to start seeing changes, because they're going to start saying, no, we got to open up the books. We have to hold people accountable, and we have to make sure that there's science, not ideology, behind these practices that we're trying to incorporate into treatment. So, okay, that's my I think my final statement. Maybe next time, Brian, if we do this again, rapid onset gender dysphoria. In the meantime, everyone, Dr. Lisa Littman, rapid onset gender dysphoria. There's a whole other area, and that's where the biggest risk is today with misdiagnosing.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of that one too. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say, I probably said this already, but I really appreciate what you're doing by standing up. I know we've had some private conversations where you've, described how this has affected you personally, and it's not easy, right? Like, I mean, you're standing up here and some people might think, oh, here he is soapboxing, this big tough guy or something, right? Somebody has some pejorative view of you. But, through conversations we've had, I know that this isn't easy for you to do. You're doing this as a matter of principle and conscience. There's a quote by Solzhenitsyn. I'm probably going to butcher it by paraphrasing, but it's something, let the lie come through, let it even prevail, but not through me. And I think if you stand up and you just stand up for the truth, right? Not asking you to, idealize or, platform on anything, just stand up for the truth and be open to looking at what's really going on. And, you might set an example for other people, be an inspiration. And I really do get a sense that the tide is going to turn as more people come forward and say, well, just wait a minute here. Something is not right. I get the thrust of where you're going. You are concerned about helping people. I'm on board, but I don't think we're aligned here, and we need to find a way to bring things back down to reality, because I think we're running the risk of harming people.
Right. I agree. So, yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And I hope we have another opportunity to do this. Like I said, there's so much more to discuss. And I think it's important. The more people hear it, the more they do the research, and they're going to start making demands and say, and again, I don't want anyone to do this at the cost of the well-being of vulnerable people. It's not talking, as you say, about othering, talking about these, the guinea pigs or this, that. No, they're human beings who have, certain conditions or issues, whatever you want to call them. And that's what we should always keep in mind. That should always be the thing that kind of is prominent that as a key motivator. It's the well-being of people who may be struggling. That's it. That's how can you go wrong if that's your guiding light?
Right. Great. Well, we've gone a little bit over time.
Just a little, just an hour or so, but hey.
You took a little bit of heat for defending Peterson. I just want to say I really appreciate you coming out. I felt it was a little awkward. I wasn't sure how to get into the beginning, but I think we got the conversation flowing really well. I really enjoyed this. I think we covered a lot of good ground, opened some new areas. I think you said something you'd never said before. That's a good one. And if you'll be willing to do this again, I'd be happy to have you on another time in the future, and we'll do this all over again and maybe talk about how things have advanced from here. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Great.
So hope people appreciate it. So.
Okay. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.